right, so are the bulls back, and what is causing maybe some of this volatility and also a lot of movement in the marketplace? I think there's a bigger picture here. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to Tech Path. I want to dive into this a little deeper with one of our partners, and I think one of our friends of the network, we'll call him, and that's Mr. Mark Moss. Great to have you back on the show, Mark.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be back and talk to you and discuss this. Yeah.
When I think big picture, I always kind of listen, and I want to get a little bit of your channel. I go to your channel, I get a chance to really kind of take a look at much bigger scope of where the market is moving, and you always kind of get me in the right direction. So you're doing some great work over there, that's for sure. Mark, let's jump to a little bit of.
Yeah, I like to look at the macro picture. You know, it's kind of like Wayne Gretzky says, like skating to where the puck is going to be. And so when you can understand like the big picture movements,
Yep.
it helps you to kind of get that forward-looking angle of like where things are going.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at some of the things that have transpired over this past week, we've seen obviously the Amazon and then the whipsaw, which was basically Amazon saying sources say that they were interested in maybe doing something. And then, of course, Amazon came back and said, well, maybe not so fast here. We're still working on this project. Do you think that is really something that is even controlling or impacting the markets anymore?
I do. I think so. What we see typically in late stages of market rallies is the markets get very sensitive to any kind of news.
Right.
And so we've obviously seen this in the greater financial market a couple weeks ago. The Fed, Jerome Powell, changed his tune from not thinking about raising rates and just changed it to maybe thinking about it in a couple years from now. But just that change in nuance move the entire markets. Then he had to go on news 16 times and talk that back. And so we see at these stages where even a little verbal thing can move the markets. And so to your point, yeah, it definitely does. I think there was maybe some bigger things that might have moved the market even more than that Amazon announcement, for example. So a couple days ago, we had a conference with Cathie Wood from ARK, Jack Dorsey from Twitter and Square, and Elon Musk.
Yep.
And so, yeah, the B word. And so a lot of people think, and it's probably the case, that Elon Musk coming out and saying that Tesla was going to buy Bitcoin pumped it up, which it happened. Then he came out and said that, because of the energy, I don't know if we're going to buy anymore. And then the price dropped. And then he was on TV around the same time, basically saying that they're still holding it. They're not going to sell it. And he seems to be warming up more. So if we're talking about like news catalysts, that might be a little bit more important than the Amazon news.
Yeah, I think with Cathie and also with what Dorsey is doing, I mean, he's putting out a lot of effort, I think, both from Square and Twitter's position in terms of what their long-term strategy for cryptocurrency in general is. And I think really the idea of new money, more so than just crypto, just the digitization and utilizing these markets in a completely different way, which I think is where Cathie Wood is leaning in terms of hedging her positions. She's gone on record. Yeah, she's gone on record here just this week where she's starting to back off some of her Chinese positions in terms of the tech stocks that they're invested in. She's obviously putting Square, I think, as their number 2 holding. So, and of course, her being on that conference was a huge thing. So, for sure. Do you see?
I think so. I think if you watch that, which I think a lot of people did, I mean, that really seemed to coincide with that price pump. And I think Cathie Wood gets it at a very deep level. She's really good. Listening to Jack Dorsey talk about it, I mean, he gets it at a whole nother level. And so you could see, if anybody was watching, you could see just from Jack Dorsey's background that he's not in Silicon Valley. He's in a third world developing country right now.
Yeah.
And so because he's in that location, he gets it at a level. And when I listened, it was interesting. I heard Elon Musk first was talking. I listened to most of it. And he started talking about the energy and where Tesla and renewable energy, this and that. And then Jack Dorsey talked after that. And when Jack Dorsey started talking about Bitcoin, he started talking about it from a human rights angle,
right?
From a human need fundamental angle. And I commented to the people I was watching it with that when you get it at the level that Jack gets it, the energy argument is totally irrelevant.
Yeah, it's mute.
spend 10 times the amount of energy. It's that important. And so I think for Jack to show that, he said it's the most important thing for him. And so to hear that level of conviction from him and Cathie, I think that probably did a lot for the market. And then, of course, like I said, Elon said he's not selling. So I think those things were helpful for sure.
What are your thoughts on what's happening in India right now? Because when you look at, and I want to get into your trip to El Salvador because I know you were, but when you look at countries that are starting to either embrace cryptocurrency or just in general digital assets, you look at India, they've kind of been on the fence, they've put a little pushback in, but now all of a sudden we see their digital currency is underway, and also the kind of the openness of the country to actually start having their banks start working with investors on essentially integrating digital currencies as a whole. So they seem to have done an about face. What are your thoughts on more of the sovereign nations kind of really moving into a position now?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've been witnessing for a number of years. I mean, China, for example, since 2013 has continued to make it illegal and open back up, and so India going back and forth, as you said. And I think
Yeah.
it's ultimately we're going to continue to see that because a country realizes, like on one hand, like shoot, we can't give up the power of our money.
Right.
Um, so we need to regulate it. But then on the other hand, if we don't, then we're not going to be competitive. Right? And so
Yeah.
they're caught between this rock and the hard place where they want to make it illegal, but they know if they do, they're basically shutting themselves off to the rest of the world. And so
Mhm.
really what they've been trying to negotiate or navigate in their own minds, in my opinion, and also talks from the ECB just this week kind of illustrate
Right.
that, which is they don't like Bitcoin because Bitcoin is a proof of work and it cannot be controlled.
Mhm.
But they do like the proof of stake because that's more like the fiat system that can be controlled. So they're
Sure.
trying to kind of navigate this where, like, well, if we could keep the stuff we can't control out, but we can let the stuff we can control in, maybe there's
Mhm.
this happy medium for us. And I'm fine with that because at the end of the day, it's a Trojan horse, and they're just going to accept this into their gates, and it's going to be out of their control. But I think they're trying to dance around that, not being obsolete to the rest of the world, but still maintaining some level of control at the
Right.
same time.
I think that's a good point too. When you look at a lot of these countries that are starting to move in this direction, that kind of embracing, mindset. One is you're right. Stay ahead of the curve in terms of adoption, the demand from the consumers. I can imagine what's going to come down the pipe here in the United States as the SEC starts to take a harder look at this and how this may play out. But let's go back to another sovereign nation you just got a chance to visit, and that was El Salvador. Talk to me about what you
Yeah.
saw actually on the street there, because we're getting some different news reports than what you and I had a chance to kind of talk about in the pre-show.
Yeah, so I just got home from El Salvador yesterday. I was boots on the ground there. I got a signed copy of the newspaper that announced that the law became legal tender there. And so yeah, I put boots on the ground. And so I've been studying this for about 7 years, putting out content, teaching, training, etc. I understand it at a pretty deep level. I understand how impactful this can be. I understand how it works, but to see it all in action with my own eyes
Right.
was something different. And so, a couple things that I would say, some big takeaways. One, uh, people specifically in the United States, Europe, and developed Western nations say that Bitcoin has no use case, there's no need for it, it's stupid, whatever. But that's just their privilege talking. They're buying a $20 drink at the bar and they have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world. If you spent any time traveling, like we mentioned, Jack Dorsey was in a developing nation when he was speaking. If you
Right.
spent any time in those nations, you understand there's serious problems. And so, just to highlight it for the audience super fast, I mean, people may not know this, but half the world half the world lives on less than $5 a day.
Yeah.
75% of the world lives on less than 10. So
Mm.
half the world lives on less than $5 a day. Half the world doesn't have access to the internet. 2 billion adults, 2 billion, so there's about 7.5 billion people in the world. 2 billion adults, probably more than half, have no access to financial services.
Right.
And if you don't have access to financial services, how can there be any equality in the world? And so, they've decided to embrace Bitcoin, and the reason why is because a small little community the town of El Zonte created this Bitcoin circular economy. And then they started layering on education and community services on top of that. And it has become so successful and so powerful that the government had to take notice. And they said,
Right.
what the heck is going on down there? Oh, shoot, it's big because of Bitcoin. Let's bring it to the whole country. They did pass a law that now, I believe in September next month, everybody has to accept Bitcoin. I believe it's a little bit misunderstood though, because it's not that the merchants have to receive it. They have to allow people to spend it, but they don't have to take it or receive it. So it can
Right.
instantly be converted into dollars at that time. And so, I know there were some reports of some protests going on. I didn't see any of that. From digging into that a little bit, it looks like it was very small, 15, 20 people down there holding signs. But the reality is, I think anybody that sees that doesn't really understand the problem that's going on there. So my eyewitness account is let me give you a couple points. One, as you're driving through these little towns, most of the things that you see would be coconut stands or fruit stands, maybe little stands where they make some food, like very small stuff. And then most of the jobs would be around construction, things like that, building roads by hand, things like stacking block walls, etc. And so the reason why I tell you that is because there's not a lot of money there, not like in the United States or in Europe. And so for these little merchants, these little stores, little bodegas to make money, they make a little bit of money. That's it. But to get
Yep.
to be able to join the financial system and to be able to accept credit cards like a merchant account system, they have to do like $25,000 a month in business, and they can't do that. And then for the El Salvadoran people, they have to have about $25 to $50 a month to pay for a checking account, and they can't do that. And so really, there's no way for this financial system to work. And so Bitcoin has fixed that. And so I was there using my Bitcoin Lightning wallet. I walked around town. At the merchant, they punch in my coffee or my bottle of water, whatever I want. They spin the thing just like you would pay at a point of sale system at a store. There's a QR code. I scan it with my Bitcoin Lightning wallet. Instantly,
Boom.
for less than one sat, for 100 millionth of a penny or a Bitcoin, my transaction goes through, and that's it. And so really, it's opened up this financial system that wouldn't be available to anybody.
Yeah.
And so it's extremely powerful to see it done that way.
So that's a real use case that is market shifting in a very big way. Do you think that there has been a little bit of suppression by mainstream media that has basically kind of, I don't know if it's a scenario of they don't want Bitcoin to get kind of the limelight or the direction of where mainstream media is? What do you think is holding back the rest of the world from just saying, hey, we've got a use case, it's working, even though it's a small, microcosm of where the markets could go in bigger countries, it is still a very good data set to kind of understand that this can work in a country?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, I would say overall, mainstream media is never going to give you the information that you need or that you should see. So, for example, right now, today, as we're recording this interview, there's
Yep.
half a dozen countries with millions of people protesting, but the media is completely silent on that. And so what's really happening is we're at the end of this revolutionary cycle. So every 250 years, there's a revolution that happens. 250 years ago was the American French Revolution. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation. Every 84 years, there's this populist uprising regime change. And so 84 years ago was World War II, Mussolini, Hitler, FDR. 84 years before that, Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. So we're in this cycle where this change is happening. And so what the developed nations are trying to do is trying to suppress populist uprising or civil discourse.
Yeah.
And so they don't want any information that can get out there that could change things. And so whether that be, these nations protesting, they don't want us to know that because people would join in. But also, to your point, what's going on in El Salvador, they don't want that news getting out either, because all of a sudden people will want that change. That being said, that's kind of like a bigger, more, conspiratorial type of take on it. But at the end of the day, what's going on in El Salvador is brand new. The law just got announced about a month ago. So it hasn't even gone into effect yet. So it goes into effect next month. So it's still very, very new. And so to the point of it being a good use case, it's barely proven. It's still very small. It's going to take some time. But that's why I was going down to El Salvador to help out. I'm doing a lot of stuff on the ground to help them with that, because it is that important. It is the test case for the rest of the world at this point.
Yeah, I think that's the
I'd
key
like to
as we
tell you.
start.
I'd like to tell you a quick little story of what I was
Sure,
doing down there because when you
love to hear it.
understand this, you're going to understand how big this is. So I'm not going to go super deep into what I'm doing, but basically through nonprofit, I'm delivering jobs down there, and you have to understand how this works. And so basically, as I said, half the world lives on less than $5 a day. They don't have jobs, right? In El Salvador, they don't have jobs. And so basically, I took down some old phones, some Android phones, and on that phone has open source internet, email, Bitcoin wallet, but it has an app that they can do micro tasks. And so this is mostly around training machines to learn. So pattern recognition, speech recognition. So I went down there with some phones and I gave them to these people, these El Salvadoran people. And they opened up, they put it on their Wi-Fi and they opened up the app. They plugged in a code that I gave them and it opened up the app and allowed them to do a job on the app right there and get paid in Bitcoin instantly.
Mm,
Now, here's the takeaway from this. I don't know who those people are. I didn't get
mm.
they didn't fill out a job application.
Right, right.
I don't have their name, their address, their social security number, their bank account number. I don't have their email. I don't have anything. They just got a phone, hooked it to a Wi-Fi, did a job, and received
Got paid.
Bitcoin instantly.
Yeah,
No information, no KYC, and no bank account.
yeah.
There's
That's a big deal.
nobody in the middle. There's nobody in the middle of that transaction. No government, no banking institution. They literally got the phone, did a job, and got paid. And when I saw that happen in real time, I just thought to myself, the governments can't stop that. This is the biggest paradigm shift in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And when technology comes and changes something 1,000% time, 1,000 times better, it's unstoppable.
Yeah, and I think that the scenario we've seen is all of these this infrastructure that's being implemented around the world, whether you look at countries outside of China and what's happened over there, but you look at a lot of countries starting to move and position, even the European Union, obviously going with the euro dollar in a digital format. Their project is underway. We've already seen, obviously, with China and the digital yuan. All this is pushing toward kind of a revolution towards the monetary system, which Bitcoin is really setting, and I should say cryptocurrency in general, but Bitcoin primarily is really setting in the center of that bullseye of where things are really going. And then you look at institutional. What are your thoughts on Goldman Sachs saying, okay, yeah, we want to jump in. They're filing with the SEC to come in with a DeFi and blockchain equity ETF. So this is just another play in the market. You think we'll see an ETF come into play this year?
Certainly, if effort has any measure of that, we will, because there's lots of people trying to get that
pushing
approved.
to get it.
I've heard of ARC trying to get one through. Goldman Sachs trying to get one through. I think at this point, it's gone from, a couple of years ago, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase saying that it's a scam, it's a fraud. If anybody in the company were to, trade it, they'd be fired, to now seeing all these institutions trying to embrace it. And so I think that shows the maturity and kind of where it's at. They see the opportunity there. Will one get approved? I think there's a very good chance, maybe not by the end of the year, but probably by next year. The new head of the SEC, Gensler, is very pro Bitcoin, pro cryptocurrency. So we have the head of the SEC already. The CFTC has been pro Bitcoin.
Right.
And we have the futures and whatnot already there. So I would say we see it sooner than later. Probably by next year, I would guess it finally gets through.
Mark, okay, so I know you don't follow, well, you're as worried about pricing, because obviously it's use case for you in terms of cryptocurrency in general. But if you look at the overall market space right now, what's happening, all the different companies that are really kind of vying and jockeying for position here in cryptocurrency, do you feel like we are still in this bull cycle through the end of this year? And maybe I've heard many people even talk about this may extend into next year. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do. I think we are. I think, if we're looking at price action and we're trying to kind of understand that, some good data that's available is like on-chain data. So because Bitcoin is an open source network, we can see that on-chain data. And so back to why this pump happened, was it the Amazon news or was it the Dorsey and Elon Musk conference, the B word conference? A lot of what I think it is, and I've been kind of reporting this to my members, is that If we look at the on-chain data, what we could see is that the selling had mostly been from day traders and
Right.
weekends. So we could see the age of those coins were like 1 to 7 days. But what we could see is that there was big accumulation happening from the institution. So there was big buys happening.
Hmm.
More importantly, I think what's really caused this price decline was the fact that China shut down all the miners, and so over 50% of the mining, Bitcoin mining, was being done in China. They said you have to shut down and get out of the country, or you have to shut down. So imagine if you ran a business and you had to shut your business down for 3 months and you have no
Yeah.
revenue for 3 months. How do you run that business with no revenue? That's very difficult. But more importantly, you have this warehouse full of equipment that you have to now move from China to Kazakhstan
Yeah.
or Texas. How
Yep.
do you afford that? And so if I don't have any income, I can't operate my business, and I have to move around the world, what am I going to do? I'm going to sell my assets to generate money. So we had
Hmm.
massive selling pressure from the miners for the last 3 or 4 months.
Yep.
Massive selling pressure for that. And what was interesting on-chain data as of last week, what we could see is that miners were starting to accumulate again.
Mm.
So we went
Interesting.
from the last 3 or 4 months, massive selling from miners, to now last week we could see miners are accumulating. And I think that was also another big trigger. So back to the question, I think we're still in that uptrend, still in that bull market cycle, if you will. I still think that we'll see, surpass the previous all-time high of Bitcoin's price this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's still our position here on the network, and really analyzing it and talking to a lot of leaders in the space, is that I would say we're, in terms of the people we've talked with, 90% still pointing at this direction, mainly because just all the action around it. It's, you've got everything from governmental regulation, countries and sovereign nations, movement at the level of major leaders like Dorsey and a Musk and a Cathie Wood. Plus, you've got all these institutions starting to move into it. There's just too much movement for this not to be the case. I want to talk about two more topics here. One is the issue of the Lightning Network, because this is something that we had the Lightning group on here on our show a few months back, really kind of explaining how the Lightning Network works, where it's basically a layer 2 option to essentially handle transaction speed for Bitcoin. Do you feel like Lightning, I mean, you saw it in El Salvador, do you feel like that could really unleash the power of Bitcoin to be used as a monetary transaction vehicle?
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Yeah,
not only do I think it, I know it because I just used it
saw
as
it.
you just said, right? So I just spent a week in El Salvador using it every day, and it literally is instant. I mean, it's that easy. So anybody who thinks that Bitcoin's too slow or too expensive, they
They
have
don't
no
know.
idea. They've never used that. And so not only does it unlock the potential as you just suggested, but it's more than that. And
Mm,
so I would just throw this out there that what we try to do to imagine something new is that we try to liken it to something that we know. So imagine electricity being invented. Oh, it's kind of like a way to have a candle, but the candle never goes out. Well,
mhm.
it was that, yes, but electricity opened up way more things, right? And so we look at Bitcoin today and we go, well, it's kind of like digital gold, or it's kind of like digital cash. And yes, it is those things, but it's so much more. And so the point that I want to make is, with using Lightning, we have an application now today called Sphinx Chat.
Yep.
And Sphinx Chat is a community, and the community allows chat. So in the community, it's like Telegram. We can talk, amongst ourselves. I can have all my podcast and YouTube videos in there, and my users of my community can download those, and stream that content from me. And at the same time, they can stream money to me,
Hmm.
and then they can chat amongst themselves, sending messages like on Telegram,
Yeah.
but it's all being done on Lightning. It's being
Yeah.
done on the Bitcoin network. And so that's not a money use case. And so the point that I want to make is, to your, adding Lightning as a second layer on top of Bitcoin, it's opening up an entire new world, not just monetary use cases, but really value transfer use cases.
Well, we had Anita Posh on our show not too long ago. She's utilizing that solution. We traced down the guy by the name of Adam Curry, who essentially kind of launched this whole era around using Lightning and the Breeze wallet to go into what you're talking about, which is where you can transmit satoshis for content creators. But this could be done
Yep.
for almost anything. Like you're talking about with your own service application that you put there in El Salvador, being able to give people jobs in third world countries and developing nations that could go into, especially as these mobile networks, which gets me into this whole other range of what blockchain tech could really do in creating mesh networks. I mean, we've talked to World Mobile Token about their project in Africa. There's so many things that kind of start to flow in this. How far do you think we are away year-wise? Do you think this is something that's really going to happen in this decade, where we get a global community, interconnected monetary system? Sure, there's going to be some digital dollars out there that are going to be out there, but the cryptocurrency platforms in general, do you think this is going to happen by 2030?
I think a big chunk of it will be, yes. And so I was kind of throwing out earlier, we have these revolution cycles, these regime change cycles. That's like political, socially, culturally. Then we have technological revolutions. About every 50 years, there's a technological revolution, not a new technology, but a revolution that changes humanity. And so we're in that right now. And then about every 80 years, the financial system gets reset. And so we're there as well. So in this decade, all of that merges together and creates massive change. We can also use something. So when we look at new technologies like the invention of the telephone or the automobile or electricity, we can look at the adoption, how long it takes for about 80% of the population to use it. That's typically the number we'd go for. One way that we look at adoption and try to measure that or forecast it is we use something called an S-curve. And so the way that S-curve would work is that typically for the amount of time it takes for 10% of the population to have adoption, that same amount of time, it would go from 10% to 90%. So Bitcoin has in about 10 years reached about 10% adoption. Now it's about 20% adoption. So based off of that, in the next 10 years, it should get to 90. So that means by 2030. And so I do believe by the end of the decade, this will be not 100%. Not everybody uses the telephone today.
Sure.
Won't achieve 100%, but I think we could see an 80% penetration in the next decade, definitely.
That's a pretty amazing statement for sure, in terms of when you look at this as an investment class or a vehicle. And I think maybe that's why all the governments are so scrambled trying to figure out how to deal with this, all the way down to China pushing this whole idea out, because obviously you can't control it. Other countries like India really starting to try to position around it. I think we'll also see some pretty heavy moves here from our own U.S. government kind of in this direction as well. So it's going to be fun. As far as public companies, last topic, and that is SPACs, so special acquisition or special purpose acquisition companies. Right. We've had this flood of potentials coming onto the market in the crypto space. Circle was one, of course, that jumped in, which is USDC. Your thoughts on, is this just a short-term thing where people are going to traditionally go through the IPO? Or do you think we'll see another kind of gold rush on SPACs to move crypto companies into the public eye?
Yeah, I think the rise of the SPACs overall is indicative of the, again, I talked about the late stage of this financial market that we're in. And so because we're in this late stage kind of bull market cycle, all the markets are at all-time highs. We have massive speculation going on. And so that is the rise to these SPACs, because SPACs are like the ultimate speculation tool. People are just basically throwing money in. I don't even know where it's going to go, but hopefully you do good with my money. I mean, if there's anything more indicative of a top of a bull market cycle, that is what it is. So to your point, I think, yes, we'll continue to see those happening as long as the financial markets hold up, as long as the Fed keeps pumping liquidity in.
Right.
Will we see it continue to move into the crypto space as you referenced? I think we will, because so many traditional investors, and especially when you get into institutions and funds, they're trying to find any way they can to get into the space.
Yeah.
And so a lot of regulations and fund mandates and things like that keep them out of it. It's prohibitive. And so they need these types of special purpose vehicles to get into the space. And so, I think it's indicative of this market cycle. And as long as we continue in this boom, I think we'll continue to see them rise. I think they'll fail spectacularly when the whole system crashes. But until then, it's going to keep going.
Well, that's a good point to end on. The likelihood of a huge market correction happening this year, when I say market correction, meaning mostly stock market correction, if that were to occur in this bull run, do you feel like that would pretty much put a kibosh on the bull run for cryptocurrency Or do you think this would be used as a hedge to go into crypto?
Both. And so what do I mean by
Interesting.
that? So
Okay.
if we look at gold would typically have been that hedge, right? That
Yep.
safe haven asset. And so if we can look at the way gold and stocks performed, so if we go back to 2008, for example, when the markets crashed, both gold and stocks sold off at the same time.
Right.
So people might look at that and go, well, wait a minute. I thought gold was supposed to be the safe hedge. Why did it drop like stocks? Well, you have to
Yep.
look at the whole picture. And so what happened is they both sold off at the same time, but stocks dropped about 60%, gold dropped about 25 or 30%. So first off, I'd rather lose 25% of my money than 60%. But that's only part of it. What happened is it's the response to the crash. So then the government printed trillions of dollars stimulus, and then that's what pushed gold higher. So gold rebounded very quickly, and it took about 6 or 7 months for gold to reclaim its previous high and then
Yep.
went on to massive returns. Stocks, on the other hand, took 7 years to
Right.
get back to their previous all-time high.
Yep.
And so
That's big.
we look at the crash of 2020 as well. Same thing. Gold and Bitcoin sold off at the same time stocks did, but they sold off less and they recovered way faster and way higher. So, for example, yes, stocks got back to their previous all-time high and eked out a little bit of a gain, a couple percent, whereas Bitcoin went up 300%.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
what do I expect would happen? I would expect gold and Bitcoin to both sell off with the stock market crashes, just like they did in the past. But I would expect both of them to recover very quickly and go on to making crazy new all-time highs very quickly, while the overall markets languish down like we've seen in 2008 and 2020.
Yeah, and that could be the last nail in the coffin too, to kind of divert the monetary system, which is one that many people have been trying to, understand how Bitcoin could be there. And now we've got enough, enough adoption, maybe not necessarily critical mass, but by the time that happened, we may get a lot of people flocking into that category in terms of an investment vehicle, which would change, the world monetary system, as a whole, for sure.
You would imagine that everybody would become very disillusioned with the system at that point.
Yep.
At an extreme level we've never seen before. And so people will be, I'm tired of this financial casino with all this manipulation and the government's propping up stocks and buying these companies' bonds. And I don't want that anymore. I'd rather go to a new system that they don't control. And so I
Yeah.
think that part of that disillusionment would really help drive that.
Yeah, for sure. Mark, it's always great having you on the show. Thank you so much for stopping in today. It's great having you.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me. Good talking to you.
All right, so you guys are checked us out over on the podcast. Make sure and give us some likes. And if you're here on YouTube, make sure and subscribe below. Also, give us your comments. We love to kind of get your input on people we have here on the channel, but also on some of the topics that we cover. If you want to reach me, just hit me up on Twitter @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.